I don't look like no tarantula. Hello tarantula lovers, I'm Alex and you're watching Tarantula Haven. I didn't make a video last week. I was expecting something exciting to happen to share with you, and unfortunately that got postponed for next week, so I can't show you that. So you might be wondering why I have a crested gecko in front of me. In previous videos, I mentioned that I do keep crested geckos. I also breed them, and something kind of interesting did happen. I had a couple of eggs that I was incubating, and they started to hatch when I happened to catch it, so I decided I was going to shoot video of it. So I got a little time lapse of that to show you. So I have here those two little cresties that hatched, and they are absolutely gorgeous. One of them turned out to be a pinstripe, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And the other one, I believe, is what you call a Harlequin, and he's gorgeous as well, or it is gorgeous as well. See if I can turn it around a little bit better here to give you a better look. Now, I've noticed some people on videos seem to act like their geckos are very fragile, and they are a little bit fragile. They're very soft-bodied. Their skin almost feels like rubber, but you kind of handle them with care. But they're not that delicate that you can't really pull them out and handle them and so on. Here's the little guy right here. This is the pinstripe. If you notice on his back there, he has a pinstripe that runs all the way down on both sides. And this is what you would call a perfect pinstripe because there's no break in the line whatsoever. I have other ones that do have a break in the line. In fact, his parents are both imperfect pinstripes. They have the broken pinstripe on them, and they've produced several pinstripe babies for me. The other one I believe is what they call a Harlequin, and it's mostly red. It's got a nice kind of chevron pattern on its back and a lot of modeling on the side. Now the only thing you have to be careful about is that they crawl everywhere. They like to walk around. They're not a very handleable pet. And one of the things that most people are concerned about is them breaking off their tails, because if they do break off their tails, they won't regrow. Their tails don't regrow, and they end up having what they call the frog butt, where they just have a little nub back there. And another thing about them is that they do like to jump. Sometimes it's very hard to get them off your fingers because they'll just want to crawl right back up. There's a good little jump. Now these two I have in front of me are Mr. Freckles and Princess Peach. And I named her Princess Peach because she's that nice peach color there. And Mr. Freckles because he's what's known as a Dalmatian, and he's got spots all over him. And when I purchased him, he was missing his tail, and that's the frog butt that they call right there. Let me give you a better look. So yeah, that's what they call the frog butt, because he's missing his tail. So why crested geckos? The reason I got into crested geckos kind of started out with leopard geckos. I had originally gotten into Leos, and you know, I enjoyed them. I even went so far as to order several color morphs online and so on. And they ended up turning out not to be my thing. They have a heat requirement. And quite frankly, I think that they're overbred to the point where, you know, a lot of inbreeding and things like that go on, and they start showing up in some of the specimens. And I think that was one of the issues that I had. So I decided I was going to completely get out of Leos. And about that same time, I started seeing crested geckos around, and they're fairly new to the hobby, but you know, not that new to where they're super expensive. The price has gone down on these guys really, or quite considerably. And so I decided I wanted to try one. And in fact, I had bought one at Petco one time. And, you know, it was on sale and it was the only one in the tank. So I bought it and I enjoyed it. And I started learning more about it. And that's kind of what kicked it off and made me really want to start pursuing them. As far as, you know, keeping some and breeding them. Now, I'm not really all that into breeding a lot of different specimens and different color morphs and so on. I just kind of like what I have in the collection that I have, and I've been pretty successful with it. In my opinion, as far as reptiles are concerned, or these kind of small lizards or geckos, they're almost like the perfect pet. So what are some of the reasons why they are the perfect pet? Excuse me. First of all, they're fairly docile. They rarely bite. You might end up with one here and there that is a little bit feisty. And in fact, the one that I showed you earlier, he's kind of feisty and he's real fidgety. And he likes to jump around a lot, but he doesn't like to be held. Mr. Freckles, he's actually gotten quite accustomed to being handled, and he doesn't fuss too much, but he does like to get around and move around and jump, you know, from here to there. So you got to kind of be careful with them. One of the cool things about them is that they do not have a heat requirement. They come from the rainforests of New Caledonia, and hence the name New Caledonian Crested Gecko. And it's relatively cool there, so they don't have that, you know, any kind of heat requirement. Room temperature is perfect for them. And as far as light, they don't have a light requirement either. So you don't have to have a UV light for them or anything like that. So they're perfect for your home. If you like the AC on and running, they tolerate that well. They do perfectly fine with cooler temperatures. They're nocturnal, which is kind of a negative thing if you like or enjoy an animal that you can see a lot during the day. But you know, they're still out and about, and during the day most of the time they're pretty dormant, just kind of sitting around. But once it turns dark, they start jumping around and they get going. So I guess that can be seen as a drawback in that they are nocturnal. But they are pretty fun. They're very soft-bodied. You have to be careful with them because, of course, they do snap off their tail. But their tail is almost prehensile. And if you put your finger there, they'll literally hold on to your finger and kind of pull away. But they use it to, I guess, catch themselves when they jump, and that way they don't fall so hard, or they can climb onto another limb and, catch themselves as they fall down. Now, as far as color morphs are concerned, there are different color morphs in Crested Geckos. So many now that I couldn't name every single one. And, they come in all kinds of different colors now. And, for example, this one, Mr. Freckles, is what they refer to as a Dalmatian. And Princess Peach here, I'm not really sure what you would call her. She is definitely patternless. She doesn't have a pattern at all. And she's more of a reddish color, but it's an orangey peach color. So, like I said, I'm not really sure what you would call this particular color morph. But I just love her because of her color. And one of the interesting things about Crested Geckos is that, like a lot of lizards, they kind of have color changes that they go through. And Princess Peach right now is not very colored as much as she could be. And I believe they call this fired down, that she's not, fired up. And Mr. Freckles, he's actually he's actually kind of fired up right now. He gets a very bright yellow color to him, and his freckles get really dark, and his pattern also gets pretty dark. But I think he's a little bit not quite as fired up as he could be. Now, if you were to purchase one of these, say, at a pet shop, such as Petco or PetSmart or any other pet shop, more than likely you're going to end up with a male. Males are considered less desirable than females. So, in fact, in the trade, your females are going to be really expensive, and they're still relatively expensive to this day. Your males, certain color morphs are like a dime a dozen. I've seen them probably as cheap as $20 for a hatchling, and they can go upwards of $100, close to $200, depending on what kind of color morph you have. And so prices vary, but if you just want a Crested Gecko, they're relatively cheap to get into, and you don't have to spend a whole lot of money on them. Their enclosure, of course, you can keep them in a small enclosure until they get bigger, and when they do get bigger, then you probably want to put them into a tall vivarium with more climbing space rather than wide, because they do tend to climb. They are arboreal. When they're hatchlings, they are kind of difficult to sex. Your breeders will usually, if you go to, say, a reptile show, the people that breed these will usually have like a jeweler's loop, and they'll use that so that they can see the femoral pores on the males. Males will have a little line of femoral pores, and females do not. So they're difficult to sex when they're hatchlings, but when they get older, they're a lot easier to sex. So let me see if I can show you the femoral pores here, if I can keep him still long enough. Alright, so you will see a line along his inner thigh there, and you'll see these little pores that they develop there. But when they are juveniles and when they get to be adults, you will definitely know that this is a male, because they have this big hemipenal bulge there where their hemipens are stored, and it's pretty easy to tell that this is a male. Your females, on the other hand, are pretty smooth down there, and they lack that big hemipenal bulge. So you definitely know when you have a female as well. little while ago my light went out and I had to charge it, and I had brought out Harley, and she is a red Harlequin. I know, real creative there, don't judge. But yeah, she was my first female, and she is actually Princess Peach's mom. And I had her out, and Mr. Freckles seemed to like that, so he decided that he wanted to be amorous with Harley. So I got a little bit of video of that. As far as breeding is concerned, it's a good time to talk about it. Breeding is super easy with these guys. All you need is a male and a female, and they will breed. It's recommended that the females be at least 35 grams, 35 to 40 grams before you decide to breed them. And you do have to be careful with their calcium levels, particularly the females. They do have these calcium pouches that you can see on the roof of their mouth. It's kind of difficult to get them to open their mouth. You kind of have to pry their mouths open with, say, maybe a popsicle stick or something like that. And look inside to check to see how their calcium levels are doing. If the pouches look nice and full, then she's good to go for breeding. If it looks like the pouches are too small and they don't have very much calcium in there, then you might want to hold off on breeding and separate her from the male, so that you don't end up stressing her out and causing her any issues, and of course having some bad eggs that get produced. As far as eggs are concerned, they usually produce 2 eggs, and those 2 eggs, most of the time people recommend that you put in a little tub in there with some vermiculite or some sphagnum moss or something to that effect, and that the female will go in there and lay those eggs. Now, I haven't had very good success with that. Every time I put in a little tub, the substrate that I use inside their enclosure is just cocoa fiber. Most of the time the female would just go down into the cocoa fiber, and you'll see her start digging, and she'll put her whole head under the ground and make a nice little hole in there, and then she'll turn around, lay her eggs, and bury it right back up. If I see her digging, I will usually, maybe a day or 2 later, we'll go in there and dig it up and check, and sure enough, I'll usually find two nice little healthy eggs in there. And as far as incubating the eggs, it's super, super easy. Because they don't have a heat requirement, I just put them in a little tub like this. Whoops. I just put them in a little tub like this. Any kind of little plastic Glad tub or anything like that would suffice. And I just put some vermiculite in there with some distilled water and put them in there. And it just has to be moist. Don't have to be real super soaked or anything like that. And about 90 days later, I think, you'll have 2 little hatchlings in there. It's not difficult at all. I've produced several babies from them, and they do sell special equipment. They have these little trays that you can put in there to keep the eggs from getting fungus or anything like that. I've never had an issue with it. I just put them in vermiculite, just sit them on top, and put them on top of my aquarium. It is a little bit warmer on my aquarium, but I try not to put it right up next to the light so they get too hot, because believe it or not, if they get too hot, these guys get stressed, and I think the eggs might hatch sooner, but they usually don't develop very well. So it's just good to keep them at room temperature, and they do all right. And it's nothing special. I produce them all the time, and it's super, super easy, which again makes them a perfect species. It's something that you can really enjoy if you want to get into breeding crested geckos. Another super easy thing about crested geckos is feeding. They really don't have any kind of special requirements as far as food is concerned. Their food actually is a pre-made powder that you give them. The stuff that I use is this Pangea. I like to use the fruit mix with the insects. It says fruit mix with insects because it actually has insect protein in it. Whereas there's another brand called Repashy, and it also claims to be complete diet, but it doesn't have the insect protein in it, so that's why I switched to the Pangea. But I used to use the Repashy, and the Repashy did just fine as well. There are other brands out there, but I pretty much just stick to those 2. Pangea is my favorite, and I've kind of moved to that. A little pouch like this will cost you about $20, but it will last you for a good while. Now, as far as mixing the food, I just keep it in a little container like this, and I keep it in my refrigerator. But, it's just a fine powder. Let me show that to you. There's not much left in there because I bought a brand new container. And it's a little fine powder like this. And you mix it 2 parts water to 1 part of the powder. And I just use my handy dandy little science wash bottle here, and I just kind of squirt water on there. Whoops, it's leaking. Excuse me. All right, and I just kind of squirt water on there like that. Oh, my dogs are barking. Sorry about that. My son just came home from work. Anyway, like I was saying, is I just add water to it with my little bottle, and then I just mix it up with the spoon. And you want to kind of give it the consistency of, say, baby food. So, I mix it up a little bit, kind of like that. And if I feel like I need to add more water, I'll add more water. But again, it's super easy. This is their complete diet. They actually don't need anything more than this. I do give them insects on occasion, just to kind of vary things a little bit. But as far as insects are concerned, they're real clumsy eaters. A lot of times they'll jump down to get the insects, and they'll end up getting a mouthful of substrate as well. So I kind of like to tweezer feed them a little bit just to make sure that they don't do that, because I don't like them getting mouthfuls of substrate. But that really doesn't matter. They just kind of spit it out anyway. But like I said, this is their complete diet, and this is pretty much all you'll have to give them, and you just mix it up. You can actually mix it up, mix a lot of it up, but they don't recommend that you do more than a week's worth because it does go bad. They also say that you should change it out every day. I kind of leave mine for a couple of days, the one night, They'll eat most of it, but usually they'll finish it off by the second night. And then I just pull it out because it'll be all gone. So they do really like it, and they eat it very well. So this is just something that, just makes them even more easy to keep. It's actually recommended that you don't give them fruits or other things, because in nature they'll find their own food, yes, but you probably won't vary their diet as much as you should as to what they have in nature. Not to mention that it will also kind of spoil them off of their normal diet, and you might have a difficult time keeping their nutrition up, because this is a complete diet as opposed to you feeding them a fruit here and there. Some people have even gone so far as to feed them baby food, the fruit formula or something like that, which of course is not a complete nutrition for them. As you can see here, they just love this stuff. I'll just lap it right out of your hand. One thing that crested geckos do require is high humidity. With hatchlings, it's recommended that you mist them at least once a day. With adults, not quite as frequently, but they do like it moist in their enclosure. You want to have their substrate, which is usually cocoa fiber is what I use, and you want to keep that moist, not soaking. It doesn't have to be soaking all the, in the enclosure, but it does have to have a high humidity. 70-80% I believe is what most people keep it at, and they recommend periods of 100% humidity at certain times, and of course that's when you would be misting the enclosure. You do want to allow the substrate to dry out to lower levels of humidity, but not dry out completely. So yes, humidity has to be up. You'll notice with the hatchlings, well, even the adults, when you do mist the enclosure and you wet things inside there, they will readily start drinking off the sides, off of any plants or anything like that. And I guess that's, where they get their hydration from. So you want to make sure that you keep them well hydrated and that you mist the enclosures so they can get something to drink. It's not recommended that you rely on their food only for hydration. That is their food, so it has to be moist, but that's not enough water for them to be hydrated. So that is an important thing about crested geckos, is hydration. So when it comes to crested geckos, be careful what you wish for, or you might end up with a problem like this. If you look here, I've got a whole bunch of little cresties. The more than I know what to do with right now. Pretty soon here I'll have to be looking for homes for them. So as you can see, I've had pretty good success breeding these little guys. These are some hatchlings that I've actually hatched from this summer, and these are from maybe a little bit older than that. They're about maybe springtime, and these guys are what they call the pinstripe. And if you can notice right here, let me get him back in view. On his pinstripe there toward the back, he's actually got a broken pattern. So that broken pattern means that he's not 100% pinstripe, whereas this little guy is 100%. Notice he doesn't have a break in the line. So in the hobby, 100% pinstripe is usually regarded as more valuable than with the broken pattern. But I ended up with two adults that actually, they were juveniles when I bought them, but they had the broken pattern. They were not 100% pinstripe, and they've produced several babies for me that are 100% pinstripe. So don't turn your nose up at some of these deals that you can get, because these breeders, they sell off their stock that they don't want, the ones that are not 100% pinstripe or so on, but you can get some awesome babies out of them. She came from a very common brindle, and my Harlequin there, and she is that beautiful patternless peach color. I don't really see a whole lot of them like that. So I think she's beautiful, and I really enjoy her. So, you know, as far as these guys are concerned, they're very prolific. They will breed for you. They will produce. They can be a very, very fun project if you want to get into them. So, you know, and like I said, you might end up with more than you know what to do with, and you can actually sell some off to friends or people on Facebook and so on. So if you're looking for a new reptile pet to get into, one that is super fun and super easy and very productive, I would highly recommend the Crested Gecko. That's it for my video for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a like. If you want to see more, then subscribe. Sorry I didn't have any tarantulas for you today, but I'll have some next week. Until next time, keep loving them tarantulas and geckos.